question?
What can I say about Joy and her conversion? Well, as I said, she was Jewish. She was born in the Bronx, and her family were rather serious Jews, by which I mean they did more than just identify culturally with their Judaism. She left that for the Communist Party after the Hitler-Stalin Pact, which I think is noteworthy. Won the Yale Bowling Prize for poetry. She wrote Letters to a Comrade, a book of poetry. Met Bill Gresham. They had this fling with Scientology, he especially. And then she began to read Lewis and to correspond to Lewis, and finally went to visit Lewis without her children, and then with her children. And Lewis fell more and more deeply for her. They married in a registry office first, largely to avoid embarrassment and to keep Joy in England because her visa had expired. And then they married when Joy was in her hospital bed, presumably her deathbed, until a man whom Lewis had taught and was a priest named Peter Bide visited and married them. That was Joy's last wish. And because he had a reputation for a healing touch, laid his hands upon them. And Lewis prayed that Joy's pain would go into him. And it did. He began to lose calcium from his own bones, and Joy's pelvis began to grow back, and she recovered, and they had their honeymoon, and they went to Athens and climbed the Acropolis. So they had 3 rather happy years together. Lewis said, I never expected to find in my 50s the romance that passed me by in my teens. And she died, as I said, in 1960. Now, she had 2 sons who became Lewis's stepsons. One is a man named Douglas, who's very involved in the world of C.S. Lewis. Another is his older brother by 1 year named David. David is not involved in the world of C.S. Lewis, wants nothing to do with it. In fact, the 2 brothers have nothing to do with each other. David loved Lewis, respects Lewis, admires Lewis, and is grateful to Lewis. When David became an Orthodox Jew and went to rabbinical school, Lewis paid for it, and Douglas was forever grateful. As a matter of fact, Bill Gresham, Joy's husband, came to visit and just got on swimmingly with C.S. Lewis. Her brother, Dr. David, a psychiatrist, visited the New York C.S. Lewis Society and allowed it, everybody was fond of Lewis. And Lewis wasn't the problem, quite the contrary. Lewis was well liked by Joy's people, including her friends who came to visit. The problem was that Joy had left her Judaism behind, and this still rankled. Now, Joy has a much bigger story than that. My colleague Clara Sirocco, who's here tonight from the Lewis Society, has written about Joy. I could talk more about her. But in a nutshell, that was Joy. By the way, just apropos Joy being Jewish, quite apart from Joy, in 1933, now note the 1933, very, very early, Lewis was listening to a broadcast from Germany by Hitler of one of his speeches, when he cursed the Jews as being completely abandoned by the one invisible God. Lewis, in a letter, just went semi-nuts and said, this shows what an imbecile this man is. The Jews discovered the one invisible God. How could he not know this of the Jews? And just, condemn the statement and the man rather passionately. Yes?
I was going to say, I'm curious to know if you can expand a little bit on the relationship between C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. I think there's a lot talked about that, and I'm just kind of curious to know.
Well, they were close. They were really very, very close friends. Now, remember, Tolkien was a family man, wife and children. Lewis wasn't, for the most part, from the 20s up to the 50s. And they got along swimmingly, and we owe the Lord of the Rings to Lewis. I mean, he's the one who not only encouraged the writing of the Rings, but his first very favorable raid in print really got that book off to the start that he got. Joy was a sticking point. And there were things about Lewis that Tolkien, now, from my understanding, Tolkien was kind of a natural grouch to begin with, I think, and cranky. But there were lots of things about Lewis that Tolkien didn't understand. For example, his great friendship with Charles Williams. That Tolkien did, I mean, Tolkien liked Williams very much, but didn't quite get the extra special value added that Lewis seemed to see. Nor enjoy, who, by the way, was very possessive of Jack, and really didn't want people coming around that much. He didn't want Jack distracted, you know, and many friends didn't come around. Now, I don't know if this says anything about Joy, but I will say one thing. Warren Lewis, who was a really very, very trustworthy man, he was an alcoholic and was troubled by this, but his judgment was very sound. He could not tolerate Mrs. Moore, but he loved Joy. And I take this as, you know, very telling testimony. Tolkien arranged the professorship for Lewis. I think I mentioned that before. And they remained friends till the end of Lewis's life. Tolkien would live up 10 plus years longer than Lewis. But there was a cooling period there, which many have attributed to the influence of Joy and the distraction of Jack. You know, now he has this life he's smitten by, and that was that. Yes, sir.
I have a question. How useful would it be to visit George MacDonald's writings in trying to understand?
Well, a very good question. It would be tremendously useful. Lewis called him his master. He said about George MacDonald, the 19th century preacher and fantasist and novelist, that he baptized my imagination with a book called Fantastes. And Lewis, in fact, compiled an anthology of MacDonald's writings. And in one of my very favorite Lewis's books, The Great Divorce, which, by the way, is not about divorce, but a bus trip to heaven, in case you ever want to know what that's like, he actually introduces MacDonald as a character. And so it would be enormously helpful. But I hasten to add that to the name of MacDonald, we could add 20 other people whom you would read fruitfully to learn about C.S. Lewis. By the way, starting with Virgil and the Aeneid, which Lewis reread, I'm told, more than any other book. And if that's not hard enough, you can go on to Dante. I mean, he's the kind of man who remembered everything he read. But MacDonald, he had a special affection for, I think. Yes?
Do you know if C.S. Lewis ever thought about converting to Catholicism, or if that was ever?
I'm pretty sure Lewis never thought about converting to Catholicism. A lot of people around Lewis thought about Lewis converting to Catholicism. And he had lots of Catholic beliefs and practices. For example, his belief in purgatory, meatless Fridays, auricular confession, belief in the real presence. I mean, there were lots of examples of this. And there was a time in the late 40s when the word went out that Lewis had poped. But he didn't. He didn't. He never wrote about this during his life for print, but some things have come out since then. So now, what Lewis would have done had he lived now, where he's living now, I have no idea. The Anglican Church is a very different church than Lewis knew. So I wouldn't presume to speculate on that. There was talk about it, but it just never came from him. Yes?
Did he include among his friends scientists?
Oh, sure. I mean, this was an Oxford man. You know, he rubbed elbows with all kinds of people. And Lewis was not quite the unsophisticated that his writings suggest. I mean, he was a homebody and cozy and smoking and drinking and tweed jackets. But he got around, you know, and he had great respect for science. Real science, not scientism. That is not science as an ideology or even a theology. But he writes about science in his books in its pure, effective, experimental sense, and understood, you know, a good deal more than you might guess. I don't know that he was up on the latest quantum discoveries. He certainly wasn't up with as much astronomy as we know. I mean, this is the 30s and 40s, and he's writing the Deep Heaven trilogy that Tom Howell refers to. But yes, he did. He did have friends and a lot of respect for it. One more? Yes.
I have a quick one. I just wanted the name of that last poem that was read.
The last poem, you should get, if you're interested, the poems of C.S. Lewis, or the collected poems of C.S. Lewis. And the last poem that was read is The Day with a White Mark. Did you like that poem?
I did.
It's just,
It's really nice.
it's really quite beautiful. I could have kissed the very scullery taps. That's how happy he was. And that's how he was. Now, I think, since I mentioned heaven and hope a good deal, we should give C.S. Lewis the last word. And his last word will be on heaven and hope. You'll see what I mean. And I thank Jeremy for reading the last passage that you will hear.
Apparently, then, our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door which we have always seen from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy, but the truest index of our real situation. And to be at last summoned inside would be both glory and honor beyond all our merits, and also the healing of the old ache. At present, we are on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door. We discern the freshness and purity of morning, but they do not make us fresh and pure. We cannot mingle with the splendors we see, but all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get him. Then, in the new earth and sky, the same yet not the same as these, will rise in us as we have risen in Christ. And once again, after who knows what eons of silence and the dark, the birds will sing and the waters flow, and the lights and shadows move across the hills, and the faces of our friends laugh upon us with amazed recognition. Guesses, of course. Only guesses. If they are not true, something better will be.